All right, welcome to this tutorial. I'm so glad you could join in. In this tutorial, I'm going to be showing how I'm going to paint a 6" by 6" square. Couldn't say that quite right. 6" by 6" square painting on cold press illustration board of the Laguna Key Hole rock formation at Montage Resort State Beach. I'm not even sure if I pronounced that location right. But the funny thing is I'd actually never had been to this place before when I painted this, and I actually did visit it a couple of days later and did some plein air studies. So usually I like to visit my places before I go, but in this case I didn't. Now what you see me doing right now are just some quick preliminary sketches to get my creative juices flowing. I do this a lot when I go out and do plein air, because if I don't at least plan a rough composition and know where my biggest, darkest shapes are, where my light shapes are, and get a rough estimation, the painting usually ends up failing a lot more than if I had done some pre-planning. So right now I have a small sketchbook, almost 6" by 6", and I just sectioned it off into 4 quadrants. I'm only going to do a couple sketches just to kind of play around. I know for one that I want the focal point to be where the hole is in the rock formation. You can see in the reference image where that hole is. That's what is so iconic about this rock formation. So I know I want to place it around the center of the image. But the tricky part is that, especially because I've never been to this painting or been to this location, I have to sort of redesign some things. Now, what I don't like about the reference image is that there's this huge rock kind of jutting and cutting in and covering the hole. I want to kind of make that a little bit smaller. I do want kind of make sure that the rule of thirds, roughly rule of thirds, that my important parts are hitting those iconic points, and that if I arrange my rock formations a certain way, which you can't really see in the thumbnail, but you see later as I walk through, I want the waves that are crashing against the rocks to lead your eye up to the focal point, which is the keyhole, right? So this is my first sketch. You can see it's not great, but again, it's just to get my creative juices flowing. I'm going to do one more. And oftentimes what I love is I love working with a Sharpie, because with a Sharpie, you have to be committed. To be honest, I'm going to share something I have not sketched in a while before this. So clearly I'm a little bit rusty. Drawing is something I need to spend more time on for sure. And drawing is a big part of painting, right? So the thing I like about the Sharpie is that you can commit. Now, if you got a brush pen or Tombow pen or something similar, that works too. But I love the Sharpie because it's so, you can just really see the strokes. I also like sketching with a ballpoint pen, as you can see here now. And I don't really crosshatch. What I'll do is I'll sort of make even strokes. And the darker I want something, I just sort of layer those strokes even more. Okay. So I'm keeping more or less the same composition. I'm kind of in this demo showing how to sketch with a ballpoint pen really quickly versus a Sharpie. Now, the key thing I want you to take away is that you can see there's no detail. First of all, these are about 2" by 2", so they're really small sketches. Second of all, I just want to make sure that I have a good idea of my placement of my shapes, so that when I go to my larger painting, I have a good idea and I won't be fumbling around figuring that out, because that stuff should be, frankly, figured out beforehand. Obviously, you're going to figure out more things along the way as you paint, but these thumbnails are really helpful to establish your largest shapes. And when I like to paint, and when I'm going out and plein air painting or doing a painting from photo, which by the way, I don't recommend unless you've done extensive plein air painting, I like to sort of scout out what my largest shapes are, what my largest shadow shapes are, my largest light shapes are. I also like to scout out the silhouette, okay? In this case, you can see that the rocks are clearly backlit, so 3/4 of the rocks are in shadow, and then the rocks on the bottom are rimlit, or this rock is kind of rimlit. So 3/4 of my rock is going to be in shadow. My challenge going into color is going to be how to make those shadow shapes and shadow colors interesting. Now, I am doing a limited palette, okay, with this painting, meaning I'm only going to use 3 colors. If you even count white as a color, then 2. So I'm using ultramarine, yellow ochre, and white. In gouache, you always need white. That's sort of a really important tip, because gouache does dry darker. So if you don't have white, you can't use water to lighten up the color, unfortunately, so you need a lot of tubes of white. I usually have a 37mm tube on me, just in case. So in these sketches, I'm still trying to figure out, where the horizon line is. Obviously, I want it more up. I still don't quite like how my rock shapes, my light and dark shapes on the bottom are vibing. So I'm just gonna darken up some values just a little bit more, but I think I'll figure this out more in the sketch. For me, my Achilles heel, and I'll share that now, is that I tend to rush this phase too much, and I know it because, like I said, I know when I do, because my painting suffers in the end. If I rush this and I don't have a clear mental image of how I want the painting to look. In this case, I think I do have a clear mental image, so it's okay. So what I just did was I took the Sharpie, a thin Sharpie, and I just grouped some shapes a little bit more. And you can see as a thumbnail, I think the bottom one in terms of shapes and rhythms is reading a little bit better. And I think the tricky part is going to be getting those skinny rock formations on the right, as you can see on the reference photo, to design a pattern that is pleasing to the eye. I don't want to exactly copy the reference photo, okay? I want to take inspiration from it, but I want to also create my own rhythm, pattern, and composition that will lead your eye to the focal point. So those are my two sketches, and I'm going to go right into the painting now. All right, so really quick precursor about this painting again. I am using a limited palette, and I want to really quickly go over the benefits of using a limited palette. I just love stripping down my colors, especially when I'm plein air painting, because one, you don't have to worry about squeezing so many colors. I mean, that's so much less stressful when you're painting outside and you have weather to deal with and people and noise and all this stuff. You just want to make your life a little easier, right? And with this specific palette of ultramarine, yellow ochre, and white, you might be thinking, Tiffanie, how are you going to get a pretty painting with just blue and yellow? Now, it's not about a pretty painting, it's about a readable painting, and I guarantee you can get a nice painting with just those three colors. So the thing about this limited palette that I love is that first you're practicing value, and value is a crux of any good painting, okay? If you have not mastered value yet, don't even think about painting in color. I'm just telling you now, because you need to understand how correct value within a painting creates a readable painting. Mood and atmosphere are directly tied to value, and I'll say this a lot in all my tutorials. I really like to hone it in because a lot of people think it's color. Color is obviously great, but you have beautiful monochromatic or neutral gray paintings that can exude a beautiful mood just as much as a more saturated painting. What they have in common, if they're both successful paintings, is that they have a very strong value structure to lie on. When you turn it black and white, the painting reads very well. Okay, so when you're stripping down your color to two colors, ultramarine and yellow ochre, you are essentially, you don't have the fuss of all the other colors. So you're actually, it's like freedom and not freedom. The not freedom is like, oh man, I don't have colors and fun colors to deal with. However, you could change your perspective and go, well, I only have these two colors to work with, so let's see what we can do to make it work. And that the latter is definitely a much better perspective. Now, the second thing that this limited palette deals with is color temperatures. And I can't stress enough how important color temperatures are along with great value structure, right? So basically, you don't have to do any thinking in a sense. Blue, ultramarine, is your coolest color on the left, on the bottom of the triangle, okay? Yellow ochre on the right is going to be your warmest color, okay, in this palette. Now, white is not a warm color. White is actually not a color. White just lightens and cools and desaturates. So every time you need a lighter value, you will need white and gouache, okay? So white is sort of the mediator. But if you need something warmer, you mix more yellow ochre, okay? If you need something cooler, you mix more ultramarine. Now, when you start mixing those two colors together, you get an infinite myriad of neutral grays, okay? I like to say that ultramarine and yellow ochre are kind of like near complements. Yellow ochre is kind of like an orange, but not really. And so when you start mixing those two together in varying amounts, let's say you have more blue, less yellow, and white, you start getting a more bluish gray, and grays are so beautiful. And I'll talk about this more as I continue painting, you'll see. If you want a warmer gray, you just mix more yellow ochre than blue along with white, and you get a warmer gray. Okay, if you want a lighter, warmer gray, you mix more white, more white. And if you want a cooler, lighter gray, you mix more white, because light lightens, right? And so you actually can achieve so many different variations with just these 3 colors. It's quite amazing. And if you're a beginner in gouache, I actually really recommend this limited palette because, again, you don't have the fuss of color and you can focus on the 2 really important things, value and color temperature, which are honestly my 2 secret tricks to creating a great painting, to really understand how to control color temperature.